So hello everyone and welcome to Carnegie Russia Eurasia program. So today's event is on Georgia. Georgia held parliamentary elections on October 26th, and the results leave many questions essentially, which we will try to answer today with our guests. So it's Marta Ardashelia, seasoned journalist from Tbilisi, Georgia. She covers essentially everything related to Russia and Georgia relations, and she's also editor-in-chief of the Georgian newspaper Sova. And we also have Zaur Shiriyev from Baku, who is a non-resident scholar at Carnegie Russia Eurasia Center. So, and also just for our listeners, please share and like the event so that as many people as possible reach to us just to listen to and pose questions. So I'll start with Marta. How does she view the process, post-election process, essentially, on the ground in Georgia? What are the likely developments which we could see essentially, and how that translates into the power struggle essentially between the major parties in Georgia? Please, Marta.
Good evening. I think that now Georgian opposition supporters are a bit depressed and frustrated, whether we saw them yesterday on a big rally in front of Georgian parliament. But still, people feel that they were that the elections was rigged, and they feel that they are desperate, but at the same time they are really frustrated because it seems that there is no concrete mechanisms for Georgian opposition to fight for their voters and to fight for their real, as they said, figures for these elections. We see that what we see is that Georgian opposition now is more legitimate. In comparison, it was like a year ago, or even in March, April rallies, when Georgian civil society and citizens were rallying against foreign agent law. And we remember that these opposition leaders even have no any right to talk in front of the crowd. Now they're kind of elected leaders, and they are doing it more freely, and we feel this certainty. And it seems that Georgian opposition now is more fulfilled after this election. But still, I feel a bit disappointment with the action plan that they offer to their supporters. It seems that there is no concrete action plan which could give Georgian opposition supporters a real concrete results. And it's the third day, and I think that this process will become something like very this lazy dispute between opposition and the ruling party, and I don't expect any radicalization of this process, or radicalization of the protest even before autumn or spring next year.
Thank you, Marta, very much. But just one small follow-up question, or perhaps even two small questions. Well, when you mentioned rigged elections, do we actually have concrete evidence, or does the opposition strive to provide it? Whether there were any moves in that direction to provide concrete evidence on that, and also, would you compare the present situation to what happened in 2020, when maybe, well, not the same, but similar processes developed in Georgia when the opposition sort of contested the results. Does the opposition presently have more chances than it was back in 2020?
I think that the main problem and the main obstacle for Georgian opposition that they do not really have the concrete evidences of, I mean, technically, and all, I think the majority, as I remember, international observers said that technically election was held quite well, and we only know about several cases. I mean, in the regions mostly populated by ethnic minorities in Marneuli and Javaheti, and there were quite high tension in Tbilisi, some districts. But technically, election was organized quite well and went quite smoothly, and this is the main problem of these elections, because we can say that the election was quite free, but was it fair? And there is the question. And another perception of how Georgian Dream has rigged this election is that they prepared quite well to the election date. They worked with the vulnerable groups, with the people who they can influence somehow or pay for their votes. And this is what international observers are agreed on, that Georgian Dream was prepared quite well. And the election, and after the election days, they went quite smoothly. And maybe you remember, it was shown by TV station, the list of voters, and then the number of, the amount of money they get from local coordinators from Georgian Dream. And that's why this. That's why I mean, I think that Georgian opposition really struggling to in discussion with Georgian Dream, because they do not have the total violence on the election day. Yes, there was some, but we remember that Georgian elections unfortunately has this tradition of violence and so on and so forth. And and what about the previous elections? I can compare only the decision when they refused to enter in the parliament, and still I don't have an position. I mean, concrete, clear position about is it right or is it wrong. I don't know. We'll see how will they manage to direct this process. Will they really get international support? Because this time we have, I mean, we have strong support of opposition from international society, which we haven't got in 2020. And I think that this is the main difference.
Thank you, Marta. Just very good, essentially, description of what's happening on the ground in Georgia. But I would now shift to Zaur. Obviously, the elections in Georgia have they impact the country's foreign policy going forward for the following at least 4 years, especially given the difficult relations now Tbilisi has with its traditional Western partners. How do you see the elections in the context of Georgia-Russia relations, where there have been quite a few developments of interest to us, and how do you see essentially Russia's view towards Georgia, towards the region, and just it'd be really interesting to hear your thoughts on that.
Good evening. Thank you, Emil. It's a very crucial question. I mean, first, I think what's important for Georgian election for the entire region is that because Georgia's geopolitical alignment is crucial for the entire region. For both Azerbaijan and Armenia, the in geopolitics is represented by the Georgia. So that's why it's, and at the same time for both countries, the ethnic minorities, they're living in Georgia, and harmony and also the less polarization is important. So I wouldn't, there is a trend of reading the Georgian election or anything happening in the region between the angle of the West and Russia. However, how Russia sees the process and what happened in the last 2 years is important to understand. First of all, I think Russian approach to the region has become increasingly transactional. Moscow now focuses on short-term gains, whether it's energy, security, or political influence, rather than building a long-term alliance, because it's the waning of the influence in the entire region. And the reason also the waning influence in the region is because also that right now the West is not recognize Caucasus as a Russian sphere of influence area. So it's right now contested. And this also opens opportunities for all three countries. Let's say after Russian invasion of Ukraine, we see a more interaction between the Caucasus and Central Asia, and which is less reliance to Russia, which the Georgia's role becomes much more important. Georgia's role already traditionally was important for both Azerbaijan and the Georgia, also for energy security. So we see right now more importance of for Georgia. So that's why. Definitely, the Russian interest is actually to impact negatively this dynamic. So that's why any polarization or abandoning of the Georgian, let's say, European integration is seen as, important for Moscow. Also, one issue that actually discuss or thought among the people in the region is that everyone is looking for the result of the war in Ukraine, and there was a very well-founded concern that after, however, how this is going to end in Ukraine, Russia will be much more, let's say, aggressive in the region. So having such an opportunity, EU integration, is also some guarantee for the entire region that there will be a firm interest and also firm the tools of the EU and the West in the region. If it's going to be abandoned, isolated, so it means that actually we will see, let's say, next few years more Russian the grip in the region. Despite we see that Russia is weakened and Russia is increasing transactional.
Thank you, Zaur. Just one follow-up question. When you mentioned transactional approach, well, I fully agree with that. But with this, keeping in mind this transactional approach, how Russia actually, or whether Russia actually needs Georgia, and in what sense? Obviously, it's a part of its near abroad. It's the country where you, along with Azerbaijan, you have those trade routes and crucial infrastructure. But in what other ways Georgia is so important for Russia that it will be willing actually to improve ties with Georgia? And I think this transactional approach would rather help Moscow in that sense. Obviously, related to that question is, if you have this transactional approach coming from Russia, is it possible that we see any shifts, any changes in Russia's approach towards the Georgia's occupied territories of Abkhazia and South Ossetia? Just will be very interesting to hear the view from Baku.
That's an interesting question. Why I'm saying that it's a transactional, because it's also part of the waning influence of Russia in the region. It's not in the dictating party. So because there is also, and there is no monopoly of the Russia, as we see, especially in Azerbaijan and Armenia in that case. Why, first coming to your question, why the Georgia, having grip on Georgia or the better relationship with Georgia, why important for Russia probably is also it would mean that actually less interaction or halting the Georgia integration to the West. So this is how this is happening. So it's not that actually we see that before in the 90s we see that actually Russia, the Georgian government tried the managing the relations with Russia, but also moving towards the West. But we see actually a different trend right now. So the first is actually for Russia, halting the integration of the EU influence also means that it's not only about Georgia, it's also about the Armenia, because Armenia is also diversification of the foreign policy is important of the integration to the EU, and also everyone is watching the Georgia, how it's going to be successful. So imagine that the Georgian isolation means that actually the entire region is going to be, let's say, more isolated or less interest of the Western the countries to the region. The second is that I already mentioned that there was a question in the last 2.5 years since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, where the Western approach to the Caucasus is ad hoc, so it's only related to the waning influence of Russia, or whether there will be strategy behind it. So we don't have an answer to this, but in order to keep the Western interest of the region, the Georgian integration is the important. So it's the third issue is that it's not only about the energy, let's say, traditional oil and gas. Right now we see that the Georgia is also important, let's say, the bridge between the Central Asia and Caucasus. And also Black Sea. So right now, actually, the Georgia is in between, and the pivotal state for both Black Sea and also for Central Asia. So that's why it's important. The third issue is that we see that the sign or possibility of the regional integration between the three countries, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia. We can say that, yes, in order to move to this stage, there should be a much more, let's say, clear path between Azerbaijan and Armenia, the peace. But overall, the barriers of this regional integration is less right now. So that's why Russia wouldn't be interested, actually, the three countries taking ownership of the region. So that's why, let's say, the Georgia is important for Russia.
Yeah, thank you very much, Zaur, and we'll get back to you a couple of minutes. But just going back to Marta, one of the questions we have from the audience, Marta, is on what role the current president of Georgia could play in the unfolding difficult situation in Georgia. How do you see the president's role? And how also you see the work of the parliament in case the opposition parties, as they already argued, wouldn't really choose the path of joining the parliament, entering the parliament. How do you see these two processes? So refusing to join the parliament, and also the role of the president in this overall difficult context.
As for president, I think she is now quite a rock for Georgian opposition, and also the bridge between Georgia and the international community. We know that, and actually yesterday she said that she held almost 6 interviews and 4 talk to the foreign leaders, and she's trying to raise attention of the world and international community to situation in Georgia. As for Georgian opposition, she's a really treasure, because you know, Emil, that Georgian opposition has had really struggling before elections, and the main issue was their discredited image in front of the society, and the law of trust from society to them, and so on and so forth. And at the same time, Salome Zourabichvili, Georgian president, She is, according to the latest polls, she's one of the popular politician in Georgia nowadays. So for opposition, she's a real asset, and for Georgian Dream government, she's a real headache because she's quite respectful politician in the West, and she represents Georgian opposition there. And she's doing this quite well. I think that what she's trying and she's managing to do is to unite Georgian opposition. Before election, we saw that Georgian opposition leaders didn't really use this tool and opportunity and her resources. And you remember how they were not really enthusiastic to join to this charter or European charter, and then to negotiate to each other and so on and so forth. But now I think that Georgian opposition really see this the importance of being more united and to have her as a voice. At the same time, about Georgian parliament, of course, it seems and it means that Georgia is not proper or real, I don't know how to name it, state when we have parliament without opposition party and only ruling parties there. And for Georgian Dream, it's not a new style of working. You know that we have years when they were alone or with their satellites. This time they even won't have a satellite party there, only Georgian Dream. And on the election days, I was in Georgian Dream office, and Mamuk Amdinaradze, he's the one of the leader of Georgian Dream, on the question, are you worrying about parliament without other parties? He said that, no, we are not, because it's not our problem. It is Georgian opposition problem, which is not true. And of course, the parliament without other parties, it's a problem of the ruling party, and it's a problem for the state because it's not legitimate. Yeah. I don't know. We will see how Georgian Dream will act. Will it be more aggressive in the next months, or it will be more quiet? And after we can somehow it will somehow influence on Georgian population attitude and actions towards them. But of course, their actions and their style, which will they choose in the future in parliament, especially, it will affect on internal situation.
Thank you, Marta. Obviously, the questions related to the foreign policy, well, in this discussion, are more going to Zaur, but I would like to ask you, how do you see the EU-Georgia relations going forward? Is it possible that we see some sort of a compromise, consensus, or compromise, essentially, between Tbilisi and Brussels, or whether there is any room left for that? Because very many analysts and scholars think that sort of some red lines have already been crossed, and Brussels will not be really trying to sort of keep Georgia under its influence, so to say. But are there, in your personal view, are there any ways where this relationship, I wouldn't say broken relations, but very difficult relationship at this time, could be repaired in any way?
I'm pretty sure that now, when Georgian Dream founder Bidzina Ivanishvili has the guarantee, the power in Georgia, he will try to restore these relations and trying to trade with the West, including European Union. And of course, for Brussels, and they're not that naive, but they, I don't know, like how our experience show that they always choose the negotiations rather than dead end in the relationships. And we know how Georgia is important for Brussels. I mean, they express it in every single statement. And you remember how EU ambassador was talking to Georgian population and to Georgian government, how radical he was, and he was even speaking in Georgian language to make his messages more understandable for every single Georgian. So I think that there is a room for negotiations, of course, and Georgian Dream leader Ivanishvili will try to restore this relationship, because and his elite, they see themselves not in Murmansk, not in Sakhalin resorts, but in the Western resorts. And this is very pragmatic approach from my point of view.
Thank you, Marta, for that. Going back to Zaur, you in one of your answers, you argued that Russia is no longer a dominant player, sort of in the South Caucasus, and I fully agree with that view. So basically, Russia now has turned into one of the major actors in the region, along with other players. Obviously, we've got Turkey, Iran, which is trying to sort of increase its influence, and over the past several years, especially following the Nagorno-Karabakh War 2020, we see that Iran sort of tried to retain its influence or even increase its influence in relations with Armenia, and now they have better ties with Baku, obviously. But my question is, given all of that, I mean, the sort of congested geopolitical space of the South Caucasus, how Russia, is it possible that Russia would still be able to retain sort of a bit more influence or more tools through which it could, play with all the three actors in here? I mean, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, in a way that these countries would heed more Russian interests rather than the others. Obviously, we also have China in here. We also have Western players still. But how, going forward, how do you see Russia's approach towards the region in the coming years, perhaps even by the end of this decade, irrespective of what's going on now in Ukraine? Obviously, if it wins, it has far more bigger prestige, but somehow something tells me that even if Russia wins there, still in the region, you will still have this multiplicity of actors. So how do you deal with that from Moscow's perspective?
You are absolutely right. So this is a different mosaic. So the Caucasus, so Caucasus geopolitics, it's not just between the West and Russia. There are the regional players, and each of them has their own interests and a different interaction with three countries. So what's the tools to Russia? So one thing is that often it's ignored by the West that all three countries are neighbors, at least let's say Georgia and Azerbaijan are geographically neighbor of Russia. So this is the fact that it's not going to be changed. So so definitely there will be more interaction, and the influence, negative and positive, will stay there. What's a Russian strong tool in the region for Caucasus is still economic ties, because despite, let's say, the European integration, despite the more Western interest, still, how to say, it's not the economic, let's say, prospect is not economic dynamics in the region is not how to say enough to compensate the Russian economic the role in the region. Just to look to this the trade turnover with Azerbaijan, Armenia, less with Georgia. So that's why the economic tool will be Russian, the strongest, how to say, influence tool in the region for a long time, even after let's say after how the war is going to end in Ukraine. And it represents also different dynamics for the regions that are actually interacting with Russian the regions, so neighboring regions in Azerbaijan, also in Georgia. So that's why sometimes it's the only economic possibility for the people that living in the border regions with Russia. So that's why it is not ignorable. So in order to reduce this influence and misuse by Russia, so we haven't seen yet that what's the Western alternative economic package, or let's say being this the three countries to get alternatives. So that's why we see, as you rightly point, more other players are how to say interacting, like the China. We see the Chinese growing influence. I will say that in Georgia, Azerbaijan, also in Armenia. So that's why still in the regional dynamics we see that the European economic let's say package or the system is not enough to compensate the loss of these countries or loss interest of these countries. So that's why I say the Russian economic tools is most important, let's say, influence tool for now and also future.
Thank you. And just a related question to that. I'm sure you followed the news about the big Chinese investments in Georgia. And since you cover a lot about the ties between Russia and the region, our region, I wondered what's your take on the Russian view of exclusively Chinese presence, growing presence in the region, or sort of expanding political ties with Tbilisi. We also know that Beijing signed a special agreement with the Baku, and also a couple of weeks ago we saw additional agreements with Tbilisi from the Chinese side. So from Anaklia to Tbilisi to Baku, how the Russians view the Chinese presence in here, and how that obviously it somehow relates to the post-election process in Georgia too, because it relates to how Georgia will be conducting its foreign policy. My take is it's about multi-vectorial foreign policy, and that's why I was wondering what's your take on China, Russia, and Georgia dynamic.
Yes, what I see that so first of all, the China cannot replicate its strategy that it has in Central Asia. That actually the Central Asian countries are between the China and the Russia, so cooperating the both. So that's why no more cooperation, less obvious competition. This is first take. So the Caucasus is different. So might be second is that might be we don't see right now any competition or aggressive stance against the Chinese, the footprint in the region, because the war in Ukraine and the Chinese importance of Russian, let's say, the policy in Ukraine and overall the region. So that's why we see. So that's why we don't see any sign of this, any aggressive rhetoric or any policy the dimension. But it will come. The third is that also. The question is that for Georgia, also for Azerbaijan, is that we have an old concept about Russia, or old concept about the influence coming from Russia, Russian control of the Caucasus over this 200 years. The old concept is that if, let's say, the guns, the military power is actually way of influence, rule and divide. But I think this the world is changing, and we see more, let's say, investment and getting, how to say, the influence of the important, let's say, transport railways is more longer-term influence. So that's why might be right now. Then we see other part of the world, in Africa, also in the Eastern Europe, that actually how the China also can create a debt trap. So that's why right now, neither the Georgia nor Azerbaijan is not seeing this trap or as a concern, but it would come. So, but also the China is important, let's say, for Georgia and Azerbaijan for the sustainability of the middle corridor. So, middle corridor is alternative for the, let's say, Russian the transport, especially we see more interaction, more importance is increasing importance of this middle corridor. So without the Chinese prioritizing this, the middle corridor, they will not be prospect even after, let's say, next decade. So that's why, so that's why I will say that for Georgia, also for Azerbaijan, the Chinese, let's say, interest and influence is important in this track. So overall, right now, Russia might not see the competitor, China, but in the long term, it will be. But it will be also the case for other regional players, Iran, Turkey.
Thank you very much, Zaur. Marta, our apologies that we sort of now shifted to these grand geopolitical themes. But going back to the internal Georgian setting, ultimately, I think what these elections bring to the table, I mean, in terms of major questions, is that what is generally wrong with the Georgian opposition? Why? I mean, I have many colleagues who are asking this question. So after so many decades since the regaining of independence, and especially since 2012, when the opposition always tried sort of to come to power, but Georgian Dream has always been successful, and the logical question arises: what the opposition is doing not right that prevents it from succeeding, essentially. And I'm quite sure that you will have your personal views and also views based on real scholarly evidence too that could illuminate some parts of this problem.
I think that Georgian opposition major obstacle is that they don't have a real leader. And in a scenario, if we don't really need such a leader, and my perception is that maybe it's enough for Georgians to be up on one leader or a messiah, maybe the political parties should have a concrete action plan, program, something that they can offer to the population, which will make a real difference. Georgian opposition during the last elections, they talked to their own bubble, They just were happy to talk to Tbilisians, to the people who live in the big cities, or those who can easily understand what is the existential problem of Georgia or existential choice for Georgia between West and Russia. And if for me or for you or for other people around us, it's very obvious. For rural population, it's not. And Georgian opposition never talked to them, never went to the villages, never visited even Javakheti, the Armenian populated region, when they have 10 or even 5% of support from the population. So this is the problem. This is the problem of Georgian opposition, Georgian liberal society. They're talking to each other all the time, never trying to engage other population. I mean, what we can name the real population, the major population of this country, which has a lot of problems every day. They really have people in Georgia really have existential problem. They need to feed their families. They are struggling to to choose education in Tbilisi, or I don't know, where they should provide their kids for money for this. And after all, they choose to emigrate to EU or other countries and then send money back to Georgia for their family. So I think that this is the main problem, because we do not have any other Misha or Ivanishvili who will, we have this real, I mean, we have this choice in 2003 and in 2012, when people, like major people of Georgia, choose like at the beginning Misha and after Bidzina, but we do not have now any kind of third leader here. And maybe it is time to think about politics in a more pragmatic way, to approach to it as a job and not as a, talent to talk to the big audiences in front of the parliament, and engage people from Georgian regions, not only from your neighborhood in the city center. For me, as I see, this is the main problem, because we've never know what was the view of the opposition parties about, education, about new jobs, and other social problems, and so on. So everything, the main message box was, we are against Russia, and so what? What does it mean? I think that's how I can characterize Georgian opposition.
Yeah, thank you. But essentially, obviously, you wouldn't have a concrete recipe for what can be done to sort of to resolve this problem which the opposition has. But still, maybe the opposition really needs to have a strong personality. Obviously, I think you agree with that opinion, but I've heard a lot of people arguing that they no longer need a big political figure around which they could gather and sort of become a serious political force. But I think the political life in Georgia is indeed about big personalities in the politics, and I think it's inevitable. If you really want to succeed in elections, you have to have a strong personality, strong political figure, which essentially serves as a figurehead ahead of the political movement. So my idea is that maybe the political elite in Georgia is thinking in a very incorrect way, to put it mildly. And I would just, was curious, what's your view on that? Some of that was already answered by you, but maybe you have some additional thoughts on what could be done to change the mentality, or perhaps a mindset, in a way, of the opposition thinking overall.
I think that it's not a goal that we can achieve like in even in 5 years or something. I think that it is not only about Georgian opposition, but about Georgian society, which needs to think about. I mean, yesterday we have this rally in front of the parliament, and I'm pretty sure that people were there not for the opposition parties, but for themselves. And I think that Georgian society needs to understand that politics is not about leaders, but it's about their lives. And if you are okay, I can understand that the families living in a real poor, they do not have money to feed their kid, and they can get money from Georgian Dream. You know that the amount was approximately 100 euro, which is quite nice amount for Georgian families. But if we will start to thinking in a way that, okay, this 100 euro I can use like for 3 days to feed kids, but I need long-term plan to survive. And long-term plan to survive could be some real stable political structure which will help me, my kids, my relatives, parents, and so on. So I think that Georgian society needs to be not only suitable to EU with the, I don't know, Justice House with zero bureaucracy and stuff, but here as well. And this is not the object that we can achieve in another 5 or 10 years. We need some time to do so, and unfortunately, only philosophical, only philosophical ideas that I can, raise here.
Thank you very much for these interesting thoughts. Yeah, well, getting back to Zaur, I think we had one question unanswered left on Georgia's occupied territories of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Essentially, just to remind the audience. So the idea is, if we see growing improvement of ties between Tbilisi and Moscow, obviously that will fall short of diplomatic or restoration of diplomatic ties, but nevertheless, improvement of ties. Would we see, I would say, some shifts in Russia's approach towards the occupied territories of Georgia? And relatedly, also, I was just very curious on how you see the 3+3 thing, the format, from the Russian perspective, and how that could be just played out in the region where Georgia refuses to participate, but after the elections, given the warming of ties with Russia, potentially there could be some shifts, or whether there might be some shifts. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, when it comes to the question, yes, you are right. I forgot to answer your question about this Georgian occupied territories. And we see, at least in the social media or among the academicians or scholars, the discussion, especially since last year, September, Azerbaijani military operation that ended, how to say, return of the territories, and also the gradually, in the meantime, the Russian withdrawal of the force from the Karabakh. Some people see it as a recipe that it can be replicated, and I think it is the wrong approach for several reasons. First of all, I think the Karabakh issue and the Ossetia and Abkhazia is total different, let's say, realities. And also the Russian stance on Karabakh, also as Armenian issues, has a long and different history. And definitely Russia doesn't want it to leave the region, because Russia traditionally and since the 90s, since the first war between Azerbaijan and Armenia, wanted to have peacekeeping forces, and in order to manage the conflict and manage Azerbaijan and Armenia. But it lost influence after, let's say, the Ukrainian war, and Azerbaijan used this leverage effectively. So in case also this conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia resolved by military force. So I wouldn't say that Russia has a eagerness or the interest of actually, let's say, freely leaving the region. So that's why I don't see as a recipe. And the second is that imagining, let's say, that Russia will see that Georgians taking back the occupied territories as a way of Georgia, how to say, turning to the Russian orbit. Let's imagine this scenario where Russia has enough power or to convince the local, let's say, Abkhazians or Ossetians to accept this, let's say, this scenario. I wouldn't say that the answer is yes. So that's why this is a very complex question. But what I would like to say that actually as every conflict is unique, every solution is also unique, and I wouldn't say that Karabakh resolution or the end of the let's say Nagorno-Karabakh is a recipe for Georgia or others. So it will be a misguide and also misguide to understanding Russia and believing that improving the relationship with Russia will end or will improve the chance of getting better territory. So this is how I see, let's say, in Baku, the people are thinking about this. When it comes to the 3+3, okay, it's a, as you said, it's a 3+2 because the Georgia, let's say, rejects being a part of this. So first of all, many people are talking about that whether 3+3 is possible integration or the platform for discussion of the regional issues. First of all, we don't have a 3. So we don't have Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Armenia together. So that's why we are looking for regional ownership between these 3 countries. Also, I wouldn't say that there is other 3, Iran, Russia, and Turkey. All 3 has a different interesting. Also, interestingly, we need to look back where this idea comes. I think the first time regional stability, the pact that offered by the Turkish side in the end of the 90s, it was called the 3+3+2, which included also European Union and the United States. So this was offered firstly by the Süleyman Demirel. And we remember also that after Russian-Georgian war in 2008, the Turkish, at that time, Prime Minister Erdogan offered again regional stability pact, similar format. And then we see after second war between Azerbaijan and Armenia, again, the Turkey offered this 3+3. So I think, but so far after, let's say, since 2020, we haven't seen that this platform is how it's functioning. So just a meeting of the level of the foreign ministers or the even the low level. So it's not a functional the platform yet. I don't think that this could be a functional platform. What will be a functional platform? First of all, 3. The Azerbaijan, Armenia, the Georgia, let's say trio discussion. We haven't seen this. Only once we remember that the Prime Minister of Azerbaijan, Armenia, and the Georgia met in Tbilisi. So the first meeting, such a meeting between the 3 regional leaders. So we need the 3 in order to take ownership, and then I think that all 3 countries might be synchronized or harmonize their relationship with the 3. So, but so far, I don't think that is relevant the platform for resolving or discussing the very important issues in the region.
Thank you very much, and I think we pretty much covered the all major issues related to Georgia's internal setting, but also how Georgia's foreign policy will be developing over the next several years. And obviously, with Zaur, we also covered the region from a bit wider perspective. Just one last opportunity to you, to Marta and Zaur. Maybe you have something to add before we conclude the event, because we essentially more or less covered all the questions which we have here in our chat. So yeah, guys.
Yeah, I'm thinking all this 2 or 3 days after election. What is the next stage for Georgia? And with my friends, political refugees from Russia, we are comparing it to the period in Russia before Crimea. Hope Georgia won't repeat this path, but I think that in a couple of months we will see what Georgian Dream policy would be toward freedom of speech and to the independent media and NGOs, of course, and of course it will shape the future path of Georgian democracy and country itself.
Thank you, Marta. Thank you very much. Yeah, Zaur, please.
Thank you, Emil. I think my last word will be that actually everyone is watching that what will happen next in Georgia, how the internal situation will develop. So I think it's it's going to be watched by not only the West but also the region more closely because it's very important. At the same time, Georgia's isolation from the West is also, let's say, danger for the region. As we discuss about this, let's say, transport corridors, energy ties, etc. So economic opportunities for Georgia. We're also thinking about that. It also means that Western interest, Western investment, infrastructure, and others. So the Georgian, let's say, isolation, if it's going to happen this way, it's also means that negative impact all the projects, all opportunities. So that's why also less seeing that this kind of project as bypassing Russian, let's say, influence. Because as you remember, that in 19th, when the energy routes infrastructure supported by the West, one of the aim was actually reducing the Russian influence in the region and making giving a much more economic independence to both Azerbaijan and Georgia, and that's why we see the Western interest and also investment. So the Georgian isolation that means that actually we see that all ongoing projects have negative impact. So it will not be seen as a, let's say, supporting element of sovereignty of this the countries. At the same time, the third issue is that so it's understandable that there's a trend is going over the world that every nation is looking for some kind of strategic autonomy. So and kind of the independence in the foreign policy, but it also depends on the resources and alliances. So it doesn't mean that you can have a war with one side of the West and also you can get something in return from other side. So this concept is not the working. This is understandable that actually not being a part of the great powers is let's say is also important for many countries. So but what we should also take into account that in the next coming of the months, the more important events is going to unfold in the region over the world. So the U.S. election and what will happen in the war in Ukraine. So and also already we see that the Middle East, the crisis. So that's why this the tiny region is going to get a less interest by Western policymakers, which is not a good news for overall the region.
Thank you very much for your concluding remarks. I will just remind the audience that we had Marta Ardashelia, editor-in-chief at the Georgian online magazine Salva, and Zaur Shiriyev, a non-resident scholar at Carnegie Russia Eurasia Center. So many thanks for your insights, and yes, that's, I think, with that note, we could conclude our event for today.
Thank you, Emil. Thank you, Marta.